Hello, my name is Karen Stangram and welcome to Conquer Crochet, the channel for tips, tricks and techniques for conquering your crochet. In today's video I'm going to be showing you part 2 of how to put together a complete project for your crochet. Last week I showed you how I was choosing the pattern from this book, which is the Pixel Crochet book by Meur. All the links are in the description below. How I chose the pattern, how I had made my granny squares, how I blocked them and how I was putting them together. This week I'm showing you how the final thing worked. I've put a border on and I have a little special treat for you at the end of this video, so make sure you stick around. So if you are keen to get going, give me a thumbs up and let's do this. So I left you on Sunday having completed up to row, almost finished row 11. And it is now Monday evening and I have finished 12, 13 and 14. So I'm now ready to start sewing together the long ends. So obviously I'll be starting with row 1. So I'm going to be unrolling row 1 and marrying that up. Sorry about the wobbly camera. Marrying that up with row 2. And then the next step will be to use the invisible stitching method to join together the first 2 rows, following along this line here. And then row 3 will come in here, row 4, etc. until we've got all 14 rows done. Wish me luck. And finally we come to the last row. Yay, row 14. So this row is an all blue row. So I'm going to be using just the blue to sew in. In between some of these, the rows that had more orange in them, I sewed together with orange thread. If you look really closely, you can see some of the orange, even though I used the invisible stitch method. But on the whole, pretty pleased with how most of this has worked through. So I just wanted to give you just a little brief reminder of how that stitch method actually works. So let's have a look. So I've got my cut off piece of yarn ready for sewing in. I'm going to make a slip knot in one end. And I'm going to find the other end to thread through my needle, and I'm using one of these needles that has the flexible eye to it so that it's easier to get through and it's actually much easier to thread. Now because it's such a long piece, I'm going to pull quite a long tail on this just to make sure that I'm not hurting my arm too much with the sewing together. So I have my piece that I've been working on, and this is the piece I'm adding. So I'm going into, just realize you can't see that here. So I'm going to go into stitch 2 in this corner chain here. So 1, 2, 3, I'm going into 2. And then I'm going to do the same on here. So I've got 1, 2, 3 going into 2 there. So I'm going to pull that through, and I've gone through the slip knot and then just tighten that up, and that should make that pretty secure now. You just need to make sure that you have you tuck this tail away because it does like to try and get in the way of everything else. So I've got my stitch in row 2 and stitch 2. Now I'm going to go into the next stitch along, the next chain along. So it's 2 in that corner, and I'll be doing the same at the other end. So I've gone into the top of the chain here, top of the chain there, through both loops, and I'm going to tighten that up. Then, as I said, I'm going to use the invisible method. I'll put a link up here to how I did that before if you want to see the different methods of sewing. So you go under the first one, putting that, I told you that tail gets in the way, under the first loop of the second one, back to the bottom, through the middle one there, underneath the chain here, and under there. I'm going to speed up till I get to the end bit here, just so I can show you how these bits all join up together. So see you in a mo. Okay, so I've gone through the last treble on the top granny square. So I've now got these corners to deal with. So I'm going to go through the bottom granny square in the 3 chain corner here. I'm going to go through that first one because the other 2 were used to join up this row here. So there's only really one left. So I'm going to go through it on the bottom and through it on the top and pull that through. Then we cross over to the granny squares next to them and starting on the bottom again, so always going from the bottom to the top. So from the bottom here, going through this one and then through this one, and then carrying on the invisible method, going under that treble, then the top treble, bottom middle, top middle, bottom left, top left, and through the middle of the chain space there. Now I'm actually going through the stitches on the chain space rather than just going underneath. You can go underneath, but what I decided to do is to go through the chain because I wanted to keep it all continuous. And had I done that on some of these sections where I had like blue going next to the white here, I would have ended up with a stitch that you could see. So there would have been a blue stitch here and a blue stitch there, and that wouldn't have been the look that I was going for. So I have finally finished sewing in all of those granny squares. Just now need to put a border on. Now this is Wednesday afternoon. I've posted something on Instagram and Facebook asking for your suggestions of what colour border to put on. I can't really decide whether or not to go with just a blue just to tidy up those edges, or should I go with a blue and a white, or a white and a blue and a white just to give it a bit of a pattern. Just feel like it needs something because it's just not finished at the moment. It just doesn't feel finished, and I really want to do a good job on this, but I'm particularly liking the pattern. Make sure, if you haven't done so already, go down to the descriptions and check out the book on Amazon. It's called Pixel Magic by Meur. Really great book. I shall definitely be using it again. Ta-da! It's finally finished, and it's too big to have on my dining room table anymore. So I've come upstairs and popped it onto the bed. So what was the process we went through? Well, we went through finding the book and choosing the pattern we wanted to do. Then we went through making each of the individual squares in the different colours, and each of the squares I chose to do in this one were 3 rounds big. Then we blocked all of the squares, and then we laid them out just to make sure we had them all, and we stacked them up in piles. Then we sewed together each of the short ends on every row just to make sure they were in the right order. Then we sewed together the long rows to join each of those together. And I finally decided on the border that I wanted to make. I didn't want to do too much that was going to take away from the actual fox itself. I had thought about putting some of the orange on the border, but I decided in the end to keep it simple. So what I did, get right up close here, I did one row of the blue just to tidy up those edges where all the corners were joining. It was starting to sort of not bow a little bit, but it was getting a bit of a squiggly line down the side. Each one was sort of bouncing out. So I decided to do a blue just to tidy that up. And then I did 2 rows of the white, and they're all in double crochet, UK term double crochet, single crochet if you're in the US. And it's quite a nice, just simple border. Just I think it needed something, but like I say, I didn't want to detract away from the whole fox blanket. I may at some point go around and do something else with the edge, maybe doing a sort of crab stitch, just to sort of finish off the edging a little bit. But actually I quite like it as it is. It's not something that I'm going to be selling, so who knows. That'll be it for me to decide. At some point I'll be sitting there with it over my legs watching television and go, oh, do you know what, I fancy putting an orange border on this now. And you can do that. You can add anything in at any time you want to. So there it is, the completed fox blanket. Huzzah! So I have a special treat for you. If you'd like to do your own designs, if you pop over to conquercrochet.com, you can go and download my PDF with the squared patterns, or you can do this on squared paper if you've got it at home. I just thought I'd make it easy for you. You can go through and colour in your own pictures and then design your own blankets or cushions depending on the sizes you want to make. One of the things you can do is make your squares different sizes, so you may want to have some that are just round 1. You may want to have some that are just round 2, some that are round 3, or you can make them even bigger depending on the size of the project you want. I'm currently working on a little project which is just using 1 round of granny squares, so I'm hoping that's going to be about the size of a cushion. If you wanted something smaller, you could maybe use a finer yarn, or you could use a smaller crochet hook. I've tended to be using a 5mm hook. If you wanted something a little bit smaller, you could use maybe a 3.5 or a 4mm hook with a double knit yarn, and that would give you a slightly smaller project. So this is the granny square pattern design sheet, and all you need to do is to print it off, and then using felt tip or colouring pencils in the colours of yarn that you'd like to use, you just go ahead and have a play around. At the moment I'm doing some letters here. I would suggest doing letters in odd numbers. So the odd numbers, so I've got 5 going down on the L and going 3 across. That way then when you have letters like the E, which is coming up now, you have space on an odd line to do that middle line, otherwise you'd be doing sort of half granny squares, which might get a bit complicated. So doing letters is fairly straightforward. I would suggest when you're doing other patterns, like the fox pattern that I did in this video, keep them as symmetrical as you can. It makes it a little bit easier when you're sewing the rows together. It doesn't matter so much whether you sew them on upside down, because they'd be exactly the same forwards as backwards. Obviously, just have a play about, see what works, see what you like. Think about how big the pattern's going to be as well. So if you were just doing that top section there that just says love, that might be quite a nice size to do an elongated oblong cushion. If you wanted to do something a little bit bigger, you could do it with the heart at the bottom as well. Obviously I would square up the love so that the middle section between the O and the V would be the middle section of the heart. I was just sort of playing around with some ideas just to show you how simple it is really just to design your own patterns and to do letters on your own blankets. So that's on the Conquer Crochet website, it's conquercrochet.com, under the resources section. You could also use this in a different way if you wanted to use corner to corner. So this is a corner to corner cushion that I've made. So the front is a fox design, the back is just plain white. If I zoom in a little bit closer, you can see how each of those stitches goes together, and you do quite literally start off in this corner and you sort of work going across the diagonals. But I will give you a video on that in the new year. So check out this book, it's in the descriptions below. In December I do have a little special project coming up, which I will tell you about a little bit nearer the time. But it will have another one of my patterns that you can have a look at, and a nice little Christmassy design for you using something not too dissimilar to what we've been doing today. Keep it to yourself, don't tell anyone. If you've enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please click on my face, which is over here somewhere. And if you'd like to take your crochet journey further, then there are 2 videos on the side here that will help you on your way. Thank you so much for joining me today, and happy hooking!